Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? I wanted to let you know what I'm going to talk about today, and then I want to talk about some audio problems that happened on 274, the previous episode. But let me let you know what we're going to be. Well, you are the listener and I'm here, so it's us. What we're going to be talking about today. I want to talk about something that happened this week where if you asked me if I wanted to do this thing, I totally would have been like, no. But because it was for somebody that I really cared about, it was really important for me to be there. And when they thanked me, it's like it felt like it was an honor to be there. But if this was just something to do randomly, I totally wouldn't have chosen. And it's kind of perplexing me. I also want to talk about when we have challenges and differences and we have a hard time doing things and someone is there to step in and help us. My husband has really stepped up in a way that I'll talk about specifically. I want to talk about the things that came up for me, and this goes into also, I was talking with a client who's experiencing some grief and has an event coming up with some people this weekend, and we talked about ways to communicate, like the choice is either to not go and to stay home and be alone, which there's nothing wrong with that, or communicate what's going on. And can we find ways to authentically show up? And it doesn't work for everything and with everybody. So I want to be very clear about that, but that's where I'm aiming on heading to go today. Something happened with the recording with episode 274. I'm not really happy about it. I had to stop listening to it because it was really annoying. And if that was your experience too, I don't blame you. I tend to, when I record, if I need to cough or something's going on, I tend to mute my mic. And I think what happened with this program that I use for recording is now it creates separate tracks. And then it took the microphone off and the sound quality was just awful. So for my editor, I'm very sorry that now I'm going to be coughing and doing everything I can online because I'm afraid to touch anything. And I know that as the listener, being really sensitive to what you hear is important. That's where we are going. So let's talk about this first thing about, and I'm going to be vague about this. I have so much I want to say that I can't, and maybe at some point I will. But if somebody said to me, do you want to do this thing where this is what you're going to do? This is when you're going to show up. This is where you're going to have to figure out where you're going. You're going to have to pay for parking. You're going to have to stand in line. You're going to have to be around a bunch of people. You're going to have to wait for a long time. You're going to be doing this formal, I'm trying to think of what the word is, things that are like routine. That's not the word that I want, but I can't think of what it is. A ritual, like a ritual. And I thought I was going to be in and out. And the person that was doing this with me thought that we'd be in and out. And it ended up taking a couple of hours. And it was such a joy to be there and to be part of this experience. I really felt incredibly grateful and honored to share this experience. But later that day, I kept thinking about, like, I couldn't rectify that if somebody just said, is this an activity that you want to do? I would have been like, oh, absolutely not. But I have this very strong belief. I have a feeling this is if you're neurodivergent, if you're ADHD, if you're autistic, if you're HSP, that I have a very strong value about showing up for people for important experiences. Like, you just show up. If somebody's sick, you call them, you offer to see if they need anything. You go to the store, you pick up soup, you pick up soda, you pick up crackers. You do whatever you need to do when people aren't feeling well. Like, that's just what people do, period. There's no wiggling. There's no negotiation. And I often will not go to the store if there's something that I'm wanting. I have a very hard time stopping to get things for myself. I have a very hard time going out. Like, I struggle with that. And if someone I cared about was sick, I would do it without thinking twice because it's just in my world. It's just what you do. And I'm just trying to understand it because there's so many things that I struggle to do for myself, but I would do them for other people because it's the right thing to do. I don't know. I don't know if this makes any sense to you. And it was really nice because this person reached out to me later in the day. We had a couple of communications and they really thanked me and appreciated that I was able to be there for them. And their partner really appreciated that I was able to be there for them. And like, of course, like, how could I not? And it just feels like such an honor. And I think that there are people that operate from this same place and they just understand that that's what we do. Soup Gene is a great example that when I broke my wrist, Soup Gene showed up with soup. When I've been sick, Soup Gene showed up with soup. When my friend got sick and I told Gene, Soup Gene showed up with soup. I mean, it's just what people do because of our values. And it's still interesting to me. And then there are people that I think don't do that. And then they question why you're showing up for them because they're just not accustomed to it. That is not what happened in this case. But it is interesting because this person a couple times said, like, you don't have to come. It's not a big deal. And it just felt really important to me. But I'm still so perplexed about it. Makes sense because we're so value driven that this is just what we do. But it just perplexed me. So I guess my question to you is, what areas do you have very strong values where you just show up, but it's not something you would do for yourself? It's not something that would be a choice or a preference, but you just do it and you push through because that's who you are and that's what you believe in. I wish I could be more specific about a bunch of things right now, but there's just a lot of ways that I can't. And I think what I can say along that lines is, we've talked about the We Do Not Care Club. And if you're interested, just being Melanie, I think it's MELANI, is on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram. What an incredible movement, and just allowing us to be where we are and to not care. And I had a couple things happen this week, just things that are annoying. The world is in such a place of unrest. I'm not going to say a lot. And I think that people are not handling it well. They're not managing it well. I'm just seeing some behavior that is kind of astounding to me. And normally this stuff bothers me. It did start to get under my skin. And if you've been listening for a while, you know that my OCD's name is Edgar. And Edgar kind of started to get a hold. And I said, Edgar, you're really having fun with this. And Edgar jumped up and down and was very excited. I happened to be in the shower. I can't remember what Matt Lowry calls it. It's like where you think about the worst thing that happened. So I gave Edgar a couple minutes to enjoy this stuff. And normally I have to work really hard with this stuff. I did reach out to Soup Gene and had a very long conversation, and she was incredibly supportive. But what I've noticed is, like, I just don't care anymore. I just don't want things taking up space in my mind. And there are a number of things that are going on. I'm not going to talk about them, but like, it hasn't been taking up space in my head. It's not going to take up space in my head. Like, I just want to let things go and really live an unbothered life where I can. And I'll tell you, it has felt incredibly freeing. And this kind of goes into what I just talked about is, what are our values and what are the things that are important to us? What are our beliefs? What are the things that we want to live by? And can we do that? I mean, we're human. We're going to get distracted by nonsense, and we can't help but being impacted by things that are going on in the world and people behaving poorly or people doing what they're going to do. We can't have control over that. But I'll tell you, there is some freedom in just being able to let some of this stuff go. And my husband and I left the other day, and there was a little bit of nonsense going on, not in our home, but outside of our home. And I just said, like, not my circus, not my monkeys. I'm just not going to take on stuff that's not mine. And it is incredibly freeing. The next thing I want to talk about is, I've been talking to you about this couple that we've been spending time with. And what I've noticed is that because one of the people tends to initiate a lot of activities, Steve and I are getting out and doing more things. We're going to be doing some traveling. It's really been lovely. And I don't know what the shift is, but I've always been a very in-charge type person. And as you've heard me talk about for quite some time, I'm really struggling with initiating tasks. I don't know what it is. I just really struggle. And over the years, I've said to my husband things that I'm interested in doing, just as sharing, but nothing ever happens. And Steve and I are doing an Alaska trip in May, and we're doing this little uncruise, which I'm really excited about. It's a small boat. It's like 80, 86 people. And we get to go on the inlets where the large boats can't go. And we're going to a national glacier park where we get to see lots of animals. And I'm really excited. I don't have a bucket list, but if I did, kayaking in Alaska would be on my list. And when the kids moved in a few months ago and having to clear out stuff and shift stuff around, I was going to get rid of my kayaks. And I reached out to somebody that I thought wanted to buy them. And the people that I thought wanted to were not interested. And just trying to clear out stuff that I'm not using, make space. And so I didn't get rid of anything, but all of the kayaking stuff that I kept inside when I would paddle, we have some storage that I moved all this stuff into. I cleared all the stuff out of my trunk. I actually use my trunk for groceries now, which I've never done because I've always had kayaking stuff in my car. And I actually was going to take the racks off my car, but I couldn't get them off. And on my to-do list was to take my car to the place where I got them on to take off my racks. But my inability to initiate tasks paid off in my favor. And on this cruise, they've got kayaks and we can kayak. And I was telling my husband, before we go on this cruise, I really want to get back in my boat and get used to kayaking and help my back feel supported so I can sit up. And my husband has said a couple times, like, let's get your kayak out. Let's get the stuff out from storage and get it where it's accessible so I can charge my marine radio and have everything ready to go. And this morning he came in and said, let's get that out and we can take your boat down and you can paddle on Sunday. And I really appreciate him initiating things. I think I talked about that when I had that upset a couple weeks ago with my son over the coffee. And I ended up never saying anything to him about it. I think when I realized what my big reaction was, it just didn't feel necessary to say anything. And I feel grateful these days for having the ability to sit with things instead of being reactive. I know for me, being autistic, being ADHD, I often have big feelings, big reactions. I often need to verbally process them, not necessarily with the person I'm having conflict with. But there's something about aging, and I'm going to call it maturity. And I don't mean to imply that anybody is not mature if they don't do this, but just being able to sit with something and to see what happens. I feel like I've blown up a lot of relationships over my life because I just didn't know that and I didn't understand, and having to communicate felt super important. And I didn't know any better. And I have a lot of sadness for that part that just didn't have the skills and the tools to do that. And we do the best that we can with what we have. And sometimes we make mistakes, and I've paid a lot of consequences, painful consequences for that. But even this morning, I had a prescription to pick up, and I had a client this morning, and my husband came in while I was still in bed and said, hey, do you want to go get your prescription before you have the client? And normally I don't do that because I don't like rushing around, but there really was an hour and 45 minutes. Yeah, an hour and 45 minutes. And I was still in bed, but I knew that I could get up and pop in the shower really quickly. And we got this stuff taken care of. And I asked him on the way to go pick up the prescription, how is it for you initiating more things? And he says he's fine with it as long as, I don't get angry with him because he's having to take charge a little bit more. And I told him, I know that I'm not a child, but I feel like I'm needing somebody to initiate things. And when I was getting ready this morning, I was thinking, well, what are you going to do when Steve's not around anymore and there's nobody to initiate? This is my internalized ableism. You better learn how to take care of things now, because what are you going to do when he's not around? And it's like, well, I'm not getting things done right now. And so if Steve helps me while he's around, and for some reason he's not around later on, then I'm going to be in the same place that I am now, and nothing's going to change. And who knows, things may change. This may help me to be able to initiate more things. I take care of the things that have to be done, the things that I need to show up for. I'm very, very, very good about those. But all the other things, I'm just not. And if I have a partner who is willing to help me and support me in the areas that I struggle with because of a disability, and I think this is where it's so challenging, especially when you're late diagnosed, if you have ADHD, if you're autistic, we just keep being told to try a little bit harder. And I remember when my kids were diagnosed with ADHD, before I knew about any of this, I did know that ADHD is consistently inconsistent. And just because they could do one thing one day doesn't mean they're going to be able to do it the next day. And I think that there's so much ableism in our society about you just need to try harder, you need to focus harder. If you're someone who, like my husband and one of my sons are, if you show up on time, you're late. So their neurodivergence works. They're a little on the anxious side and that they'd like to be places early. And it can be hard for them to understand people who have a different relationship with time and don't show up on time. And I'm not talking about a moral thing about should people be on time, should they not be on time. I'm talking about having compassion and understanding for neurodivergence and all the things that we struggle with, and how there can be a lot of misunderstanding and lack of compassion, and how we often internalize that ourselves. And I have a lot of this. How come on some days I can get all kinds of things done and on other days I can't? And I think it was yesterday or the day before, must have been yesterday because I went to Aquafit. I just was tired and could not get anything done. And last night I slept 9.5 hours, and something's going on with my body and my body needs some rest. But how hard it is for me and how much I judge myself, because our society is so capitalistic and based on productivity and achieving and accomplishment. And there's a book called Rest is Resistance, and it really talks about how we don't honor and value rest, and our bodies need rest, our minds need rest. And how can we allow ourselves to have more of that and to have more self-compassion around the things that we struggle with? I mean, I've talked about my piles. If something has a place and there's a system, it's much easier and I'm much more likely to follow that system. It doesn't mean I do it all the time. But if something doesn't have a home or I'm not sure what to do with it, then that creates a challenge. And that's executive functioning. It's how our brains are wired. And it's not that we're bad or morally incompetent or lazy, but that's often what we've been told and what we internalize. Are you the person that supports somebody? Are you somebody who receives support? And I have to say, last night, my son, his wife is back at her parents' house this week, and he went out to the store. He had told me he needed milk, so I assumed he got milk, and he came back in and went to his room. And later on, I got up and went to the fridge, and I noticed there was no milk, and I wondered if he had gone to the store. Did he get the milk? Did he leave the milk in his truck? And I texted him and said, hey, I'm just wondering if you got milk at the store and if you left it in your truck, because I don't see it in the fridge. And he texted me and said, the game is almost over, but I left it on the counter. And I didn't remember seeing it on the counter, so I got up again, and it was sitting in the bag from the store on the table, and I put it into the fridge. And I know recently he went to the store and they got orange juice when his wife was here, and he was cooking and she was going to put stuff away, and he said he'd take care of it. And then the orange juice sat out all night. And so again, these are just ways that we struggle with executive functioning. And when do you step in? When do you not step in? Because I felt like, he's a grown man and I don't need to be reminding him about milk, but I also know that sometimes he forgets stuff, and it would suck to leave the milk in his truck all night, although it wasn't in the truck. So I think that these are very common things, and we can get irritated and annoyed, or we can figure out. And if it was one of those nights where I just thought, I don't want to be the reminder, then he gets to deal with the consequences of leaving milk out until he remembers to put it back. There is no right or wrong. But I think it's important to be aware of these aren't things that people do intentionally to annoy us. It's just ways that our brains function. And the last thing I want to talk about is I was talking to a friend who recently had a loss, and she was going to go visit with her family, some other family, and wasn't sure if she wanted to go. And we talked about, is it possible, because one of the people that she was going to visit and stay with, she feels really comfortable with. And I said, what would it be like to say, hey, I just had this big loss and I'm not feeling like myself, and I don't really want to be home and be alone, but I also don't know how much I have to offer. And so I'd love to be there, but I don't know that I have a lot to offer. And it's a great way to check out how comfortable people are with you just being in the space that you need to be. And I have done this, I've shared this with you before, that with this couple that we spend time with, I often will say, hey, I'm feeling really grumpy, or I just don't want to be going out. I know the last time we went out, I resist having to get dressed up, but because it's not an expectation, I thought, maybe I'll put on something a little nicer. And I put on a little makeup because the demand and the expectation wasn't there. And I think what we do, because we've been told this, is when we are having big feelings, we're angry, we're sad, we're grieving, we're lonely, whatever those big feelings are, we've been told to go off on our own, have our feelings alone, deal with it. And the only time and way that it's okay to come out and into society is to either mask or wait until we can show up and act like everybody else, like there's nothing wrong. And the challenge with that is that we don't allow ourselves to be supported and be with other people when we're struggling. And we may be in relationships where we can't do that. It could be that in our family of origins, it was not okay to show up when you had big feelings, whatever they were. And we don't learn that there are people, hopefully, that can manage and be okay with us being our authentic selves. So if we're lonely or sad or tired or grumpy or grieving or angry or frustrated or disappointed, that we can show up and be authentic, and that there are certain people that have room for that. But we never learn it if we don't ask for it and learn to communicate. And then part of that communication could be, how is it for you? And this is what I did with that couple. How is it for you when I tell you how I'm feeling? And they love the authenticity, and it just feels like there's no pressure when we get together. And I have a number of friends that we often make a plan. And I think my autism just feels like when we have a plan, I don't want to do it, but I just know to show up. But I know that there's no pressure or expectation for me to show up anyway. And then whatever happens, happens. And it is so nice to not have that pressure or expectation to have to be chatty or cheerful or talkative or engaging. That part of intimacy can be sitting in silence or sitting and doing our own thing or having minimal conversation. We can't have this with everybody, but if we don't understand the need and can come up with the language for it, we can start practicing and seeing, are there people that we know where we can do this with? And then the other part of this is that this friend was going to be visiting family, and then there was some family that was a little more challenging to be around. And I asked if their partner could be a buffer and maybe do some work ahead of time saying, hey, my partner's going through some stuff, and tell this family member that, they may need to go lay down, they may need to take a nap, they may need to take a walk, because it may be under these circumstances that my friend just doesn't have it in them to deal with a relationship that may be a little bit more challenging. And so it doesn't have to be the either or of going and not getting your needs met or not going at all because you don't think you're going to be able to get your needs met, but then being isolated, where sometimes being around people right now in this period of grief is kind of feeling comforting, but the person doesn't have a lot to give. So are there situations where maybe you can ask for what you want and there is room for you to show up and be where you're at without having to be shiny, sunshiny, happy, bubbly, engaging, asking lots of questions, but you can be there and be supportive. And it may be that other people feel the same way, and you may be the person that's breaking the mold and allowing people to be more authentic. I think we are craving connection right now, especially with all the things that are going on. And we need that sense of community and belonging. And it doesn't have to be taxing and exhausting. And I think that when we have those friends or people in our lives where we can show up authentically, man, there's just nothing like it. There is nothing like it. I think that is all I have to say. How are you doing? How are you surviving in these times? It is not easy right now. And are there things that you can do to take care of yourself, to nurture yourself, so that you feel a bit of grounding? You have a right to be feeling all of your feelings, whether they're big feelings, little feelings, feelings that make you feel comfortable, feelings that make you feel uncomfortable. You can't screw up being you. You have a right to be authentic. You're not for everybody. Everyone's not for you. we're all doing the best that we can right now. And the more compassion we can have for ourselves and for people that are not behaving as well as they could for whatever reasons. I really appreciate each and every one of you. I hope you're doing well. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how your brain is wired. Have a blessed day.